Okay, I'm gonna do my best to not get canceled. I recently went to the Miami Open in 2024, and a lot of people in the comment section and the Discord were asking me to do a comparison of the Sunshine Double. The Sunshine Double consists of Indian Wells and the subsequent Miami Open the following week. Both are Masters 1000 for ATP and WTA, and are the last big tennis tournaments before the official clay season is underway to go into the French Open. I did a vlog for both of these tournaments, Miami in 2024 and Indian Wells in 2022, so let's see how they compare. This analysis and critique also does not reflect any individual, but rather a generalization on my experiences in both tournaments over several days. Just as a forewarning, this is an absolutely subjective and anecdotally based comparison between these two. I've broken down the comparison into 4 major categories: location, layout of the tournament grounds, the courts and how easy it is to access to view them, and the last one is the wow factor, which is a little bit more general. Now let's compare these two after you hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell for more original tennis content. Indian Wells is located in Southern California, or SoCal as the natives call it. About a 2-hour drive east and a little south from one of the most expensive cities in the US, Los Angeles. However, I would highly recommend flying into Indian Wells and Palm Springs PSP Airport instead of LA, because it's only a 30-minute commute by car to the Indian Wells tennis grounds. If you guys have ever been to Southern California, you're going to realize there's extremely little humidity present. It's not nearly as bad as Phoenix, Arizona, but it is definitely noticeable. One of the big downsides in terms of weather is the drop in temperature after sundown. You know how deserts usually get really cold after the sun sets? Yeah, that's actually a thing you're going to experience if you haven't before. Although the weather is somewhere between hot and pleasant during the sunshine, Indian Wells gets to dip around 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit after sunsets. So for non-locals, you need to bring extra layer of clothes, sometimes even pants, if you plan to stay for the night sessions. The locale in Indian Wells is actually pretty chill, although there is not a lot to do in the vicinity of the tournament site. Outside of the tournament site, excuse me. There are a good amount of localized restaurants such as brunch spots and nice eateries, but nothing too crazy. As for the people in Indian Wells, both inside and outside the tennis tournament, everyone was actually super pleasant. A stark contrast to what I experienced in Miami, but more on that later. The traffic was actually almost non-existent, and literally every person I had an interaction with at the tournament grounds felt like they were true diehard tennis fans in the tournament. Overall, I will give Indian Wells a 21 out of 25 for the location category, point deductions for the dry weather and the sharp drop in temperature when the sun sets. Oh, and also, frequent wind was kind of an issue as a tennis player. 2,500 miles east and a little south of Indian Wells is Miami, located in the southern tip of Florida. The grounds for the tournament have 2 major airports within a reasonable distance: Fort Lauderdale Airport, which is about an hour north, and MIA, Miami International, which is only 30 minutes from Hard Rock Stadium. Although the temperature is about the same as Indian Wells during March, it is much more humid, which is something I actually like, both as a spectator and a commentator. And unlike Indian Wells, the wind really isn't an issue, although there is an occasional light breeze, and the temperature drop is not nearly as drastic. It only dropped to about 60 degrees Fahrenheit during the evenings, which is actually quite pleasant. Now let's talk about the locale. There is a lot of things to do around Miami in terms of food and entertainment, from the numerous amounts of amazing but overpriced restaurants and bars, to the entertainment like karaoke, to the nightlife. You will definitely be busy in Miami. Outside of the tennis tournaments, you will keep yourself busy, but because of the price, your credit card will also be hurting the next credit card statement. But let's talk about the people. Not gonna lie, not really a fan of the Miami crowd, and that doesn't even include the Miami Heat, but that's a different story. In terms of tennis, the crowd, which includes both locals and non-locals, most of them seem fake. They didn't seem like the diehard tennis fans one would come to expect out of a Masters 1000 ATP and WTA event. I'm not talking about the people that came up to me and recognized me. Trust me, those gals are diehard tennis fans. But I'm talking about the other bystanders in the stadium, the side courts, and the overall grounds. I got the overwhelming feeling that a good amount of the spectators I saw in the Miami Open were just there for the Instagram post and saying that they were there, instead of watching the spectacle of these world-class athletes, world-class tennis players, battling it out in one of the biggest professional tournaments of the year. In fact, a native Miamian, if that's a word, did confirm this in my YouTube comment of my vlog. Also, Miami locals are literally the worst drivers I've ever encountered in a first world country. And yes, they are worse drivers than Chicago and New York drivers. During the drive from our Airbnb, I think I saw God's face no less than a total of 3 times due to the countless reckless driving, borderline accidents, and overall idiot drivers I have seen on the road. Honestly, it was like one step away from third world driving like the Philippines, Manila specifically, that I've been to several times in my life. Miami drivers, as a general population, need to go through some driving school and need to learn how to use your turn signals. I will give Miami Open a 13 out of 25 for location. Indian Wells has a really nice parking situation. The parking lot is on the same grounds as the main entrance and the tournament grounds, so if you plan on renting a car driving to Indian Wells, the logistics of parking is absolutely not a problem. When I visited Indian Wells back in 2021, there were 3 major tennis shops just to the right of the main entrance. There was the Fila store, that is your typical tent shop for what you would expect from a large professional tournament, and there was also a bigger tent that had more official Indian Wells branded apparel. But my favorite part was actually the Tennis Warehouse tent. Yes, Tennis Warehouse. There was a very clean, official, well-organized Tennis Warehouse, a more permanent-looking tent that had almost everything you could imagine in terms of rackets, strings, and accessories. And yes, you could watch your stringers do their thing in progress as well, which is pretty cool. But my favorite part of the Tennis Warehouse tent was actually they had a tennis court adjacent to where you could demo a variety of tennis rackets. This was extremely popular, and there were always people lined up to hit tennis balls for the racket demos and string demos to an extent. And yes, Chris and Troy from Tennis Warehouse were also there. Really cool guys, actually. The food at Indian Wells was decent. Yes, they had your typical food carts, hot dogs, burgers, and whatever under the tents. But they also had established restaurants, specifically the bougie sushi place, I believe it's called Nolo, that is connected to the stadium courts. A bit overpriced, but I would still recommend it just for the experience. The drinks were also plentiful from the amount of beers and refreshing mixed drinks. I would say the drinks portion is flawless for Indian Wells. Also, there were plenty of drinking fountains to refill your water bottles, and bathrooms were always within 5 minutes of walking of anywhere on the grounds. And for the men and women's bathrooms, there was never a wait. I give Indian Wells a 22 out of 25. Points off for me wanting a little bit more food variety, but the drinks were fantastic. This is the part of the video where I'm going to start laying into the Miami Open. Spoiler, Miami Open does not fare well at all from this point out. The parking for the Miami Open is atrocious. The designated parking spots and the drop-off pickup for rideshare like Uber and Lyft is across a major street that seems like a highway most of the time. So it's about a 1 to 1.5 mile walk that you have to traverse, but thank goodness there was a skywalk across the major street aforementioned. Parts of my body were already chafing because of the long walk before I got to the tournament grounds. I will say though, the gift shops in Miami were awesome, even though there were only 2 official ones. An official Miami Open one and a Lacoste. Both were attached to the main stadium. And yes, the Lacoste was actually really bougie and really cool, really good atmosphere in there, but yes, extremely expensive. Also, the Miami restaurants were fantastic. From pizzas, tacos, to burgers, there were a surprising amount of restaurants and bars, a lot more variety than Indian Wells. However, one of the worst parts of Miami was the bathroom situation outside of the Hard Rock Stadium, which is the main stadium. There were only 2 bathrooms I could locate for public use outside of the stadium. And the weird thing is, they were located within 4 minutes of walking of each other. One is connected to the grandstand, and the other set is a nice set of porta potties 4 minutes north of the grandstand. And if you're watching a tennis match, let's say on court 1, like I did when I was watching Evans and Eubanks, you have to walk 10 minutes to use the bathroom and 10 minutes back. A complete waste of time and a horrible layout for a basic human need. If you think that I'm insinuating that the current Miami Open ground should not be hosting tennis tournaments, you are 100% right. It honestly felt like I was in the middle circle of a NASCAR track. Well, it's because I actually was. There's literally a racetrack around Hard Rock Stadium grounds. Maybe that's why Miami drivers drive like maniacs, because they think they're constantly on a racetrack. 16 out of 25 for the Miami Open amenities. Points off for the awful parking and atrocious bathroom situation. Let's talk about the courts in terms of spectating. There are 2 stadium courts in Indian Wells, and both are perfectly fine. Both are typical stadium courts that have tiered seating towards the tennis court. Pretty logical, right? Well, wait until the Miami portion of this section. The side courts in Indian Wells are also fantastic. Even though the courts were some grandstand courts that are free to enter, they required scaffolding to be erected for viewers to watch on both sides and behind the players. They are nicely laid out for all viewers to have good perspective on all parts of the tennis match. However, what really amazed me for Indian Wells were the bank of practice courts towards the back. It was absolutely amazing to see ATP and WTA players practice literally within 15 feet of me. In Indian Wells, the practice courts are by far my favorite part as a tennis spectator, because you have visual access to all practice courts, and you can have intimate access. Like seriously, you could be within 10 feet of the single sideline on way over half of these practice courts in Indian Wells. And bonus points for the practice courts being in one single block instead of being spread around, unlike other Masters 1000 tennis tournaments. Overall, this is a perfect score for Indian Wells in terms of spectating. Okay, let's talk about the Miami Open's tennis court situation. The Hard Rock Stadium, the one and only stadium court, was awful. Keep in mind that the Hard Rock Stadium is an American football stadium where they host the Miami Dolphins, and that's where they play, and the layout and the viewing for the stadium was modified to host this tennis tournament, and it absolutely shows. About 1/3 of the seating was actually in the seating that are naturally in the stadium year-round, and the remaining 2/3 were on temporary seating held up by scaffolding. There are two massive problems with this setup. First, the permanent seating inside the stadium, they weren't good at all. Yes, the seats were close enough in terms of being close to eye level, but they were way too far away to actually feel the pace of the tennis ball hit by both players. Unless you got to the court level seating, which is way too expensive for 99% of people. Second, the temp seatings were an extremely awkward angle and they were way too high up. The lowest temp seatings that were closest to the court were like tier 2 seatings in most stadium courts I've been to and I've seen on TV. A massive disappointment to the fans that bought stadium tickets. I feel like I've been absolutely ripped off. The side courts for play were thankfully in a much better situation. I felt like these courts were much better situated. In fact, believe it or not, I would actually pay more money to watch the side courts instead of the shit show that is the Hard Rock Stadium. And lastly, the practice courts were an abomination. There were 17 practice courts, a bank of 9 and a bank of 8. The bank of 8 was not only completely closed off, but unviewable to the public for some stupid reason. The bank of 9, which was technically open for viewing, was laid out like a pickleball player did the planning for this tennis tournament. There was a small walkway for fans to sit and view, and it separated the bank of 9 into 7 courts and 2 courts. So 3 of the courts were viewable to the public, but the remaining 6 courts were super distant. It was horrible. And although there were some temporary bleacher seats at each of the practice courts behind the players, the far 6 bleachers were inaccessible to the public, so I don't know why they are there to begin with. Miami Open courts get a total of 7 out of 25 for the court situation. The wow factor is probably the most objective category for comparison between the two tournaments, and it is not mutually exclusive with any of the previous categories aforementioned, but it is still important for the miscellaneous categories, the subjective feelings while being at the tournament, and the overall synergy that the entire tournament has for spectators. There is just something about Indian Wells that cannot be expressed with precise words that can be conveyed in a YouTube video. From the spectators that are hardcore tennis fans to the amazing backdrop of the snow-capped mountains when watching the practice course and walking around the grounds, Indian Wells gets a perfect 25 out of 25 for the wow factor for me. This is a little bit different from Miami because I couldn't get the feeling in the back of my head that the Miami Open is more of a cash grab than a passion project for the Miami community. I just absolutely hated the layout of the grounds. Out of all the events hosted on these grounds, it seems like tennis is by far the last in mind when these grounds were engineered. I'm desperately asking, as a mere YouTuber and avid tennis fan and tennis player, that tennis director James Blake seriously consider moving the Miami Open back to the Crandon Park in Key Biscayne, I believe it's called. It also doesn't help that I almost got into a fight with someone in the first night because he claimed I bumped into his shoulder in a narrow passageway going into the Miami Stadium on the first night to watch Sinner. I give Miami Open a pitiful 5 out of 25 for the wow factor. These comparisons have nothing to do with the price. I do not know how flexible your budget is for stuff like this. So do whatever research you need to do to figure out what tournament out of the two you should visit. But as a small side, I'll tell you right now, if it wasn't for the Discord members I went with, I would say Miami Open was a complete waste of my time. So my bottom line is this: stay away from Miami Open at all costs. Indian Wells is better in every single tangible way except for maybe the weather. So what do you guys think? Have you been to the Miami Open, Indian Wells, or possibly both? Are my sentiments right on the money, or did I miss it completely? Leave a comment down in the section below, or better yet, join my Discord where I will be starting to organize the Indian Wells 2025 trip. Visiting the Miami Open this year made me realize how much I missed a well-organized and laid-out tennis tournament, and how fun it actually is. Don't forget to follow me on Twitch, and on YouTube I will be streaming 2 to 3 times a week, probably Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So if you guys have any questions, hang out with me, and let's drink some rackets. And as always, guys, happy hitting.